Last year you drew some heat for your letter to President Bashar Assad in Syria because you basically thanked him for helping to protect Christians that were being slaughtered and persecuted during the civil war there by the jihadist groups. But now here we are a year later, and the dialogue continues as to whether or not the U.S. will allow President Assad to remain in power, or if the U.S. is ultimately going to have to support one of these potentially jihadist terrorist groups to overthrow him. What is the situation like from your perspective in Syria at this point?
You know, I think the letter that I wrote has played out exactly as I had predicted. What we have now, Saudi Arabia and Turkey have formed something called the Army of Conquest. They did this back in March, and they have coordinated ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And when I say Al-Qaeda, they call it Al-Nusra, but it's Al-Qaeda in Syria, so I'll refer to it as Al-Qaeda. They've coordinated them, and they've begun a drive against the Syrian government. Syria still holds most of the population centers, which is key. But at the same time, the terrorists were making clear headway. Now we have Russia, which has finally said, look, we've had it. We have watched this game play out long enough, and we're going to put forces in there, and we're going to get this thing moving. We're going to get it resolved. And I'm really, really pleased that the Russians are putting some people in there who are genuinely going to fight, because I'm not entirely certain which side the United States is on. I think sometimes we play one side, sometimes the other. You know, we set up a no-fly zone with Turkey. The Kurds had almost completely sealed off the Turkish border. Now, all of the terrorist supplies and jihadists come out of Turkey, in the north at least, and the Kurds had very nearly sealed it all off. And so we went in, we agreed with the Turks that we would have a no-fly zone, and that no-fly zone actually is designed to keep open the lines of supply from Turkey going into the ISIS capital of Raqqa. And the Turks made a big show. They said, oh, well, we're now part of the coalition against ISIS. They have launched 300 airstrikes, and only 1% have been against ISIS. All of the others have been launched against our Kurdish allies. And so clearly what Turkey is doing is they're opening a wedge so that the lines of supply will not be cut off to ISIS. And the United States, unfortunately, has been cooperating with them in doing this.
Indeed. Would you say that President Obama is essentially in violation of the Constitution, perhaps as he was during the Libyan war, by supporting various factions there against Gaddafi in Syria, by basically putting America into a state of war in Syria without getting congressional approval to do so?
Well, I won't speak to Obama in particular. I will tell you, beginning in 2011, Hillary Clinton, as Secretary of State, put into place a series of actions to overthrow the secular governments in the Middle East and to replace them with radical Islamic regimes. Why she was doing this, I know she has great connections, financial and otherwise, with Saudi Arabia, with Qatar, with Kuwait, with some of the tyrants of the Arab world. They tried to overthrow Egypt, and the Egyptian people rose up. 30 million people in the biggest demonstration in all human history took to the streets in Egypt, and they took back their country from the Muslim Brotherhood. The United States did succeed in destroying Libya. Libya no longer has a government. It's simply a land of chaos and disorder. But we attacked Libya with the express purpose of capturing their weapons, sending them into Turkey, and then Turkey, in turn, uses those weapons to arm jihadists to attack into Syria, which was a neutral, non-belligerent country, had never taken offensive action against any other nation. And so, yes, I think clearly the coalition against Syria is in utter dramatic violation of the law of land warfare.
So here we are, obviously, in a region with so-called allies like Turkey and Saudi Arabia, whose interests don't seem to be that of the American population. We actually seem to be more, actually, you would think we'd be more allied with the Russian perspective, as the Russians are now involving themselves against ISIS. And yet here we are, we could potentially end up in a confrontation against the Russians in Syria. How could you see that unfolding?
You know, the hypocrisy of the positions taken by NATO and to some extent the United States are just stunning, because we claim that ISIS is the greatest threat to mankind and that it's got to be stopped, and yet we attack their biggest enemy, which is Syria, and now the Russians rush to the rescue and provide inspiration to the world. And here we are saying, oh, wait a minute, we're not so sure, because, and the reason I'll tell you is this. We know that when the Russians go in, and they're going into Latakia province, where they're in a position to seal off another piece of the Syrian border, where supplies are coming across to Al-Qaeda, we know that the Russians mean business. They're not going to be there flying jet aircraft and then bringing them back with their bomb loads as we've been doing. There's a tremendous amount of fakeness to our war against ISIS. We know that when the Russians go out, when their planes go in, they're going to bomb. Now, I'll tell you what, in any war that you fight, you go after the enemy's capital. You think about the Second World War. We went after Tokyo. We went after Berlin. This is typically the way you do it. The United States, for years, has known that the capital of ISIS is in Raqqa, Syria. Raqqa, Syria is totally functional. Every once in a while, there's a little bomb strike here and there, but it's all for show. We have allowed Raqqa to function. I don't believe that the Russians will do that. And I'll tell you what, if I were advising President Putin, I would tell him, you know what, coordinate with the Kurds, coordinate with there are Sunni tribes that are very much against ISIS in that area. Coordinate with them, give people a certain period of time to get out of Raqqa and flatten that city. Turn it into dust, because that is the capital of ISIS, the most evil, the most demonic force on the face of the planet, and we need to take it down. We need to take out their capital.
But as we pointed out, it does seem that ISIS itself was allowed to form because of American support against Assad going back to 2012 by actually arming many of these jihadist groups that ultimately seem to have metastasized and splintered off into what is now ISIS. So again, it shows the contradiction of policy here from the United States' point of view. In one sense, saying they want to attack and destroy ISIS. On the other hand, people like Petraeus have said that we should support Al-Qaeda, al-Nusra against ISIS. What do you make of those kind of claims?
I think they're idiotic. I know Petraeus, while he's in disgrace, I know he was supposed to be the big military leader. I have no confidence whatsoever in somebody who says that we ought to be working with the most brutal terrorist in the world to bring down Syria. Now you think of it, before this started in 2011, Syria they had the greatest religious freedom, they had the greatest rights for women of any Arab nation. And here we are saying, we're going to take sides in a religious war between the Shiites and the Sunnis. We're going to side with the Sunnis. I have nothing against Sunnis or anything against Shiites, but the United States has no business interjecting itself on the side of the most radical demonic people on earth. Now, if you look at what happened in Mosul, this is very peculiar. This was very mysterious, where all of a sudden, all of the officers on cue abandoned their troops, and the troops were left there to be slaughtered. There were acres and acres, literally divisions, armored divisions, artillery divisions of American equipment, the most modern equipment, and it was left there. The United States took no action to take it out, and we should have immediately gone after that. Immediately. I mean, this is something that this was a no-brainer. Destroy whatever you can before ISIS can get it out of there. Additionally, one of the peculiar things, and I don't know, I'm not an expert on this, but ISIS captured $500 million of cash in Mosul. I'm not confident that the banks in Mosul typically held on hand $500 million in cash. That's a lot of cash. Banks limit the amount of cash that they hold. I think there was money that was placed there. The arms were placed there. I think there were covert actions taken to cause the Iraqi army to disintegrate. And I think that was a means of supplying ISIS. And immediately they moved those weapons into Syria. And today, every major operation is led by American Humvees, American artillery, American armed vehicles. All of the supplies seem to come from the United States. We channel them sometimes through the Turkish MIT, the intelligence agency. Sometimes it's through the Qataris or the Saudis. But we're funneling weapons. You know, everybody says, well, we've got to stop this war in Syria. If you want to stop it, stop sending jihadists in there. The United States is training jihadist terrorists in Turkey, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar, and we're training them to go in. Now, if they go in, we've spent the last 4.5 years trying to overthrow the government of Syria, trying to find a quisling, a puppet, who will do our bidding in Damascus. We haven't come up with a single name. The only recognizable name is al-Baghdadi, the head of ISIS itself. We don't have a single leader among these so-called moderate rebels who have never really existed. They've always been just a propaganda ploy. This has been a war of al-Qaeda, the Muslim Brotherhood, and ISIS against the Syrian people. And you know, a year ago, there was an election held in Syria. It was a fair and open election. And President Assad won the election. And it's amazing, if you look back, we call him a dictator. I don't know what makes a dictator if he's elected by the people, if he's popularly elected. The Christian Science Monitor said that the election signals to Syrian and the world that Assad is not a dictator fighting for his life, but the elected leader of a country battling foreign-backed terrorists. This is the Christian Science Monitor, which is a very balanced publication. The New York Times said that the huge margin of victory by President Assad was entirely believable. The Washington Post said the election sent a powerful signal of Assad's control. How did he get this control? He got it from the people. 60% of the people are Sunni Muslims. The Sunni Muslims voted for him. The Alawites, the Christians. The people of Syria do not want to see a new leader. We know that if Assad leaves, that it'll be a signal that the Syrian government will disintegrate, and immediately then Al-Qaeda will take over. The dread black and white flag of Al-Qaeda will fly over Damascus. Within months, Lebanon will fall and Jordan will fall. And from that launching pad, ISIS will begin a historic drive against Europe. You can already see it with these refugees. They didn't come out of the blue. Turkey is forcing refugees into Europe as part of a civilization jihad, so that these people will be available to undermine Western civilization and to advance jihad. Remember, the Turkish president Erdogan has this dream of reconstituting the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire has slaughtered Christians over and over and over 1,000 years. They intend to do it again. And so I believe it's an essential time. The Russians, I hope that the Russians will double down on what they're doing. I hope they will quickly join the fight and seal the border of Syria. If you seal the border of Syria, you make it seal the border of Turkey. If you seal the Syrian-Turkey border, you make it extremely difficult for ISIS to function and extremely difficult for Al-Qaeda to function. So I'm very hopeful that we will see the Russians roll into action very shortly. And I tell you, it is my hope and prayer that the United States will wake up and say, you know what, it's time to end this slaughter. It's time to stop trying to topple regimes, bring order to the Middle East, stop the bloodshed. If we stop training jihadists and arming jihadists, the war will end, because the war has never been a domestic uprising since the very beginning.
Yeah. We make some excellent points, obviously, about the Turkish role in this, in the formation of ISIS and the various terror groups and their perhaps agenda, long-term agenda in the region and also in Europe. So, I think you made some great points today. And as you pointed out, without ISIS's resurgence, America would not have a justification for continuing the war against Assad. So in a way, we seem to be creating the enemy that we can then continue to fight, and that is to the detriment of all people, American, Middle East, and in the Middle East as well. So thank you so much for coming on and making those points and talking to us today, Senator Black.
Well, thank you very much, and I hope that the next time that we meet, we can say that finally the United States and Russia have joined hands and gone against ISIS and crushed them. I think we can do it if we can simply have the political will to make it happen.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, totally agree. Thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you very much for letting me be here.